As early as the mid to late 80s, Jez San knew that he wanted to bring a space combat game to the Nintendo Entertainment System. But there was one big problem. The NES would need a little help to process the wireframe graphics that San had in mind. And on top of that, his company, Argonaut Games, was just a little company with no connection to the behemoth company that was Nintendo. So San decided to do something drastic to get their attention. He had his team hack their Nintendo Game Boy. It was a gamble that ended up paying off, and it led the team at Argonaut Games down a path that resulted in the creation of Star Fox, which was released for the Super Nintendo in February of 1993. Today we're going to tell you the story of Star Fox, its development studio Argonaut Games, and the technology of the Super FX chip that went into making it such a unique game. So join us and get ready to do a barrel roll as we take today's trip down memory card lane. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope these words find you happy and well. Hello, and welcome to the 130th episode of the Video Game History Podcast, A Trip Down Memory Card Lane. Each week, we'll tell you a story about one topic relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game, console, a person, technology, so on and so forth. While doing so, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world as its legacy. Today, we're all going to learn about Star Fox, originally released for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System on February 21st, 1993. That'd be 30 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
I'm David Casson, and as always, I'm joined by that little voice co-host, the slippy toad to my own Fox McCloud. He's my brother, Rob Casson. Rob, how's it feel being compared to an anthropomorphic frog?
Motherfucker, we all know I'm more like Falco than Slippy. Come on, I am not useless. Get the fuck out of here. I have use. Slippy is... Ugh. Anyone who's played Star Fox knows Slippy. No.
and, and and also joining us today, I guess he's the peppy hair to my Fox McCloud. He's returning guest. It's Ryan Shepard. Ryan,
Hey everybody.
Woo!
I
are you
just
the
want to say
hair?
I'm honored to be the peppy hair.
You're honored to be the peppy hair.
I'm the oldest.
Oh, well, yeah, actually. Yeah, that is true. That
Sure ain't
is
me.
very, very true. No, it's definitely not you.
More grizzled, I'd say.
Experienced, for sure. All right, Ryan, I'm going to start with you. What are you up to in gaming these days? What are you playing?
Well, I have my hands on the shiny new Metroid Prime Remastered.
Oh, you did end up picking it up. Is it everything you hoped it would be?
It is amazing. Yes.
I'm so glad to hear that. I have my eye on it. I still gotta do Dread though. It's a tough call for me. Like the next one, because my gaming plate is overfloweth. Dread or remastered. I feel like I kind of want to do Dread because it's a new story and Prime I've played. You know.
If you haven't done Dread, definitely do Dread. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Dread will be the next one. Rob, how about you?
Well, this week has been another light week in gaming, so it's your Melvor Idol, RuneScape, and a game or two of Rocket League. But yeah, no, not a whole lot. How about yourself, Dave?
I do believe it's been late for me. Rocket League Malvor. I think I logged into RuneScape and killed one thing.
Woo!
And then I've played a few levels of Hi-Fi Rush this week. All right, moving on. Ryan, you familiar with the original Star Fox?
I am, but
But you have more. You've played one of the others more, correct?
Star Fox 64 is near and dear to my gaming heart.
And Rob, you just got done saying the exact same thing to me, didn't you?
Indubitably.
So before I even go into that, I'm going to ask one more question, and we're going to touch base on. We'll touch base on Star Fox 64 and Star Fox 2. We'll kind of lump them all into one today. Would you say at this point, because we know that these characters have kind of more so taken a life of their own through the Star or Smash Brothers franchise, that maybe we've played them more in Smash Brothers than we have in Star Fox at this point?
No,
You don't think so?
I wasn't real big on using Falco or Fox. I mean, I played them a little bit, but the amount of time that I put into Star Fox 64 definitely exceeds the amount of playtime that I would have with either of them in Smash.
Fair enough. Ryan, what about you?
That's a tough call because, like Rob was saying, I've played so much Star Fox 64, but that was a long time ago, and there's been a lot of opportunities to get lots of Smash Brothers in.
Yeah, see, I was thinking about that as I was writing this episode, and it's a tough one. I honestly think that at this point, I've probably played more Smash as these characters um, than the game. Now, my familiarity is the exact opposite of you guys. I did not have a Nintendo 64. I did not play Star Fox 64 at all, but I did have this one, and I played a lot of this one. But coincidentally, we're all going to be familiar with the same game, and we're going to talk about that shortly. But really, this story starts back in 1978 when, at the age of 12, Jez San was gifted his first computer. It was a TRS 80. Rob, in case you didn't know, that was a Radio Shack computer. But
Thank you. I didn't know that.
TRS literally stands for Tandy Radio Shack,
What's Tandy?
a company that made computers.
Oh,
So Tandy Radio Shack 80 from his father. Now, San had first become interested in video game development while playing MUDs. If you've listened to our podcast in the past, specifically, we covered MUDs in Rob, your favorite game, RuneScape, the RuneScape episode. MUDs are the precursor to modern day MMOs. So, as a teenager in high school, San founded Argonaut Software as a way to get software consulting jobs with larger companies. Initially, he was working on security systems for companies like British Telecom and Acorn.
Acorn.
Acorn was a computer company.
Okay.
We've briefly talked about them in the past, but I've never delved into them too much. So, but in 1984, he decided to try his hand at video game development. That year in particular was a pretty good year for him, actually. For one, Jez became a wizard, which was another name for an admin in the Essex Mud, which we know just as Mud, which was the world's very first online multiplayer role playing game. So he was one of those fancy wizard people that guided other people into the magical world of Mud. He
Nice.
also writes, and that's pretty cool to be able to say that you were an admin on the very first online MMO. I mean, that's a thing, you know.
Oh, for sure.
Also in 1984, San co-wrote a book about the Sinclair QL called Quantum Theory. Rob, we just talked about the Sinclair QL last week when we were talking about it was the random computer that they tried to make Bandersnatch for in the middle. Yeah, that's what it was. And also in 1984, San published his first video game. It was a game called Skyline Attack for the Commodore 64. Anyone ever heard of this game before?
Nope.
Anyone?
Nope.
Yeah, me either. It was a side scrolling shooter in which you're tasked with defending very realistic cities from alien invasion. It was received pretty well because it had noticeably more realistic buildings and landmarks than other games of the time. It had we're talking 2D sprite graphics, but it had a recognizable Eiffel Tower. Games up until that point mostly had just like, squares with more squares for windows and doors. But really, it was his next game that kind of started this whole story. In 1986, Argonaut Software developed a game called Star Glider. It was a first person combat flight simulator that was rendered with wireframe graphics. Now, really, up until this point, Argonaut Software was just Jez, but Star Glider was a hit and it sold hundreds of thousands of copies, in which he reportedly made about £2 per copy, and so that was a lot of money. And he used this money to start hiring other employees, which really kind of is when Argonaut software, kind of blossomed and became a thing. Now, Starglider was originally developed for the Amiga and Atari ST. The success of Starglider led San to hire other development studios to port the game to other platforms. Fun little side note, Argonaut Software, in case you don't know the reference, is from Jason and the Argonauts, and he got the name, which is his name, Jason, Jason and the Argonauts. That's where he got the name from. Not relevant. I just thought I would tell you that.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Rainbird Games ported the game to IBM compatible PCs in the ZX Spectrum. Solid Images produced versions for the Commodore 64 and Apple II GS, but like so many other gamers in the late 80s, us included, Ryan and I, San had his eyes on the Nintendo Entertainment System. That's not an assumption on my part. You're definitely a Nintendo kid, aren't you? You're still a Nintendo kid. That's such a stupid question for you, Ryan.
Born and raised.
I know you're still a Nintendo kid. Like that's stupid. So the team mocked up a prototype using I think it was an Amiga computer, and they called it NES Glider, which simulated what they wanted to do in putting this game onto an NES. But they wanted to match the wireframe graphics. They wanted to make it look as good. And so, in order to do so, they would have had to have an added boost from additional hardware, like a chip, for instance, which would allow for awesome 3D graphics on the NES. But there was really one problem at this point. Argonauts was just a tiny British software developer that has really only made one game. And Nintendo, at this point, they were like one of the biggest names, if not the biggest name in gaming. So, how do you get them to notice you? Now, if you've been listening to our podcast for any length of time in our mini stories about Nintendo games, you know that the best way to get Nintendo's attention is to hurt their pocketbook because Nintendo is all about the money. So Argonaut put themselves in front of Nintendo in a rather ballsy way. They showed Nintendo that it was possible to defeat the copyright protection on their handheld console, the Nintendo Game Boy. Now, in a later interview, Jess-san recalled how they did it. He said they had the Nintendo logo drop down from the top of the screen, and when it hit the middle, a bootloader would check to see if it was in the right place. The game would only start if the word was correctly in the place it was supposed to be in the ROM. So if anyone wanted to produce a game without Nintendo's permission, they would be claiming to use the word Nintendo without a licensed trademark, and therefore Nintendo would be in a position to sue them for trademark infringement. That's pretty ingenious, actually, since that was just becoming a thing then, you know?
Oh yeah, it is.
It's insidious.
It is. The team at Argonauts figured out that with just a resistor and a capacitor, 1 cent's worth of components, that they could beat the protection. So basically, the system read the word Nintendo twice. It read it once to print the screen on the boot up, and it read it again to see if it was in the correct location before starting the game cartridge. And that was a mistake on Nintendo's part because the first time that it popped up Nintendo, they used those devices to get it to return Argonauts on the screen instead. But on the second check, that capacitor and resistor powered up, so Nintendo was actually what the machine read itself, and the game booted up perfectly. So they were able to just subvert it with nothing, which is just so damn clever.
Any kind of system hacking is just incredibly complex. More so nowadays, maybe than using pennies back in the day.
Well, I mean, you're right, but it's just so fascinating that all they need to do was like literally, you know, just really basic electrical components to fake that the word Nintendo was where it was supposed to be, and that's all it took to hack the Game Boy. That's it. That's it.
Well, it's comes down to how much simpler the technology was. I mean, you're talking, a couple chips here and there as opposed to, what they have now, billions of transistors inside of one small area. I mean,
Very true. Very
it's
true.
night and day. So that pennies, you have to multiply that by a million. So now you're, $1,000 to make a decent, which obviously it's not a good comparison, but definitely takes a lot more work to get the same amount of effort.
Very true. Now, the company had come across this because obviously they had wanted to develop for Nintendo, but development kits were expensive and hard to come by. So the team basically hacked one together using a Game Boy and a Tetris cartridge. They opened up the Tetris cartridge and they like soldered wires to it to the console with a custom made circuit board in the middle that allowed them to write and upload custom code through it, and that was basically their dev kit: a Game Boy and a Tetris cartridge.
Whoa.
Isn't that kind of fun? That's I mean that's how they did things back then, because they couldn't get their hands on an actual one. I don't think you can well. I say you can't get away with that, but I mean you don't even need a dev kit to develop for consoles anymore. So once they had their hacked dev kit, they tasked one of their developers, Dylan Cuthbert, with creating a 3D engine for the Game Boy. NES Glider really didn't become a thing. They didn't know what to do with it back when they made it. That would have been like Star Glider was what, 84, 86. Star Glider 2 would have been 88 roughly. So in the meantime, they had made this NES Glider demo, but they couldn't figure out how to get in front of Nintendo. So they're trying all this other stuff in the meantime. Now, Star Glider 2 was 1988, and the biggest difference between Star Glider and its sequel was that the second game had filled polygon graphics and not just wireframe. In fact, Star Glider 2 was one of the earliest, not the earliest, but one of the earliest 3D polygon games. So when Dylan was tasked with creating a 3D engine for the Game Boy, he created it in the style of these earlier games, Star Glider and more specifically Star Glider 2. And what he created was a rough space combat simulator for the Nintendo Game Boy. So in 1990, they walked into the Consumer Electronics Show and they basically had something now that could work with Nintendo's technology in terms of subverting it, and they had something that they could show of what they could do with Nintendo's technology once it was given to them. And they took it to the most senior person they could find at the show, and admittedly, they were impressed. Um, it's ballsy, but it worked out in their favor. Wouldn't be the first time we've heard of developers, kind of presenting someone something like this on a whim at one of the Consumer Electronics shows. It's worked out in most of the stories, worked out here because the team was invited to Kyoto, Japan, and Nintendo expressed the fact that they were very impressed with their work on 3D games, such as Star Glider and Star Glider 2, and they asked them to work on 3 games with them. Now, at this point, Argonauts, there's a lot of things happening, right? So the Game Boy demo, for starters, was fleshed out into an entire Game Boy game. Now, this game was released only in Japan in 1992, and it's a space combat simulator called X. And it was developed by both Nintendo and members of Argonaut. And it's really only one of maybe 2 or 3 Game Boy games that have actual 3D graphics. I think there's only 2. I'm giving myself a little bit of wiggle room with 3, but there's not a lot at all that have actual 3D graphics. It's modeled after Star Glider. It's a game in which you protect your planet from aliens. It was slated to be released in the United States under the title Lunar Chase, but when it was presented to Nintendo of America, they declined it because they felt that a space combat simulator was too advanced for a console that was meant for children, which is how they perceived the Game Boy in the United States. You ever heard of X before? Either of you?
I haven't.
I didn't even know. Okay, what X gonna give it to you? Is that where you're going?
Well, I was gonna say it's also a name for ecstasy. A lot of people call it X,
X
or
marks the spot.
he's also the leader of the professor. He's the professor.
Professor X. Oh,
Yeah.
what about Mega Man X?
Oh yeah, there you go. So I've definitely heard of X, just not in this context.
Not the game X.
Not the
Final
game X.
Fantasy.
Final Fantasy X. There's a good one. That's I guess anytime Roman numerals are involved, X is in there somewhere. If you have to count up to 10. Um, yeah, I had never heard of X. I didn't even know that there were 3D games for the Game Boy. It's really fascinating to me to know that one, if not two, exist. Also, this story, and we're gonna learn another one, has a lot of Nintendo making really stupid game decisions for really stupid reasons. I don't want to release a game for the Game Boy because it's too advanced for children. What kind of bullshit is that?
Well, they didn't think that us grown-ups would want to play games.
That's a good point, actually.
Just a business decision. It's like, well, no one's going to buy it, so why put it out?
Yeah.
It's like,
Yep. Yep.
well, misguided though it may be.
Yep. Now, X wasn't the only thing that Argonauts brought to the table with this relationship. Now that the relationship with Nintendo was formed, it was time to bring back the NES Glider demo.
Oh,
So they showed it to Nintendo, and this is 1990. So of course, 91 would be the Super Nintendo. So Nintendo asked them to consider making the game for their up and coming Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Now, San was honest with them from the get go. As impressive as NES Glider was, it was never going to get any better unless they were able to make custom hardware to allow the Super NES to process 3D graphics better. This was, after all, the idea that they had as far back as NES Glider. They always prototyped on a PC and worked out the details later, and they knew that those details included the consoles needing a little bit of help. So they took this concept to Nintendo and said, we can't do it without some custom hardware. Nintendo agreed, and they tasked the team at Argonaut Games with working on custom hardware to assist with game development. So the team at Argonaut reached out to some chip designers they knew, and they started working on a project called Super Mario FX, and then simply called Mario at one point. Now, Mario, other than being Nintendo's mascot, in this case stands for Mathematical Argonaut Rotation and Input Output. It ended up being a chip that they designed to work with this game. Now, fun fact, the first run of these chips in Star Fox, since we're talking about Star Fox today, they actually say Mario Chip 1 printed on them. Basically, Mario Chip, which we now know as the Super FX chip, is a graphical support unit that was added to Super Nintendo cartridges to allow the Super Nintendo to play more advanced 2D and 3D graphics than it was normally capable of. Ryan, do you remember any of the hype around the Super FX chip?
absolutely. First of all, I got to give props to the acronym team. They did a stand-up job there with the Mario.
Yeah, I'm not exaggerating. You can go online, look at a picture. All most of the copies of Star Fox, the chip in them, because there's different generations of Super FX. The first generation, literally the print on it is Mario Chip 1, which I really like. It was a thing, wasn't it? Like magazines and television commercials, and
Nintendo
like
Power, the commercials. It was, it definitely propped up as kind of a, you know, almost, semi next gen advancement.
no, seriously. Well, so let's talk about the Super FX chip for a second. Now, it literally it pretty much does what a graphics card does for us in a computer. It takes some of the graphical brunt off the CPU, the computer itself. To be, in all honestly, this is a fact. The Super FX chip is actually the first 3D graphics accelerator that was built into any consumer product. Nowadays,
No
a lot
doubt.
of things have 3D graphics accelerators. Your phone has a 3D graphics accelerator, basically, but at the time, that was unheard of, and this is the first time anyone ever did it. The Super FX chip itself was so powerful that the team at Argonaut often joked that the SNEX was just a box to hold their Super FX chip. And they weren't wrong. just to put it into perspective, the clock speed on the processor that was built in the Super Nintendo was 3.58 megahertz. The Super FX chip was clocked with a 21.4 megahertz signal. So that's what, 7 times as much, roughly 6 point something times, right?
Yeah.
Math.
The math checks out.
Yeah, I was gonna say y'all are. I'm not the math guy in this group, so
Yep.
um, and damn it. And before anyone catches me, yes, I'm aware 21.4 megahertz was not the case for Star Fox, which we're talking about today. In the first generation Super FX chip, they had an internal clock speed diviner that halved the clock speed to 10.7 megahertz. So for the Mario chip, it was 10.7, but there were other FX chips and other FX games, and all of them were clocked at 21.4 megahertz. And technically, the Mario chip was too. They just divided it for whatever weird reason. Probably because they couldn't figure out how to use all 21 megahertz at the time.
Shout out to Stunt Race FX.
Oh my god, we're gonna talk about that because I had Stunt Race FX. I loved Stunt Race FX. Well, I will talk about other. We'll talk about other Super FX games, but yeah, definitely a shout out to Stunt Race FX. So the Super FX chip was designed and in place. The team at Argonaut got to work designing the game they wanted to make. They did all the programming for the game's engine, and so it fell to Nintendo to work on the character design and artwork. Now, for that, they turned to two very well known video game designers. Now, the first one is the most famous of the famous, Shigeru Miyamoto, creator of, I mean, he needs no introduction, but if you're a weird person who doesn't know video games and doesn't listen to very often, he's the creator of Mario and The Legend of Zelda, just to name a few of the things he's brought to the world. And the other was Katsuya Iguchi, who is best known for creating the Animal Crossing series, which we covered way back in episode 55. Rob, that was a long time ago.
Yeah, that was, the 130 minus 55 weeks.
Yes, I know. It's getting really weird looking back. The math checks out again.
Just checking.
Okay. All right. It's getting really weird looking back in this catalog going, I know we did an Animal Crossing episode. It doesn't feel like that long ago. And then I hit it and it's episode 55 and I'm like, oh, wow. That was a long time ago. So Nintendo wanted to make an arcade style shooter, and Argonaut, not surprisingly, suggested using spaceships because, I mean, what else have they made but spaceship games? Let's be honest. Actually, that's not true. I didn't add it here, but they also made the 1991 licensed TV video game Days of Thunder. You remember that movie?
Oh yeah,
I
great
thought you were going to say
movie.
Days of Our Lives. It's like, I didn't know they had a game.
I loved that video game too. The movie was great, but the video game, I was one of the early video games I remember racing, like that was actually like NASCAR style racing, and I played the heck out of Days of Thunder as a video game for the NES. It was also Argonaut. So Miyamoto character design, he stated that he wanted Star Fox to star animal characters because he didn't have any interest in making a conventional science fiction story. You know, one that had humans and robots and monsters or superheroes. That wasn't his thing. Um, so Nintendo headquarters is about a 15-minute walk from a site he frequented called the Fushimi Inari Tasha Taisa. I always butcher these ones. Fushimi Inari Taisa Shrine, which is a shrine dedicated to um, basically their deity of foxes, fertility, rice tea, and sake, also of agriculture and industry. Protect a lot of things, this deity, this god. Um, One of the most impressive parts of this shrine is a row of torii gates known as the Senbon Torii. You know, torii are those atypical, like when we think of Japanese things and you see that like red gate that's got like the curved top on it. You know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
I mean, that's pretty. I mean, that, yeah, that's a torii gate. So basically, in the history of this shrine, which goes back thousands of years, wealthy merchants in the town would donate and basically sponsor a new torii going up. And so along the main part of this shrine, there are said to be around 1,000 torii gates that you have to walk through in its main path. And there's, of course, we always put my research on the show notes. So if you go to its Wikipedia page, which is going to be in our show notes, which you can find at www.memorycardlane.com, you can find what the Senbon Torii looks like, and it's pretty cool. But these gates, walking through these 1,000 gates, are actually the direct inspiration for the gates that you go through as you pilot your ship through the game. And if you were listening a moment ago, you'll learn that Inari was also the deity for foxes, right? So the shrine had all these kitsune statues or fox statues, and Miyamoto would walk past them all the time, and this is where he got the inspiration to use a fox as the main character. Hence, we have Fox McCloud. And then for the rest of the team, there's some pretty fascinating stuff there too. He turned to Japanese folklore for the rest of the team. A bird and a hare are pretty common in Japanese folklore. So our bird, Falco Lombardi, and our hare, Peppy Hare, Fox's partner. And Slippy Toad, everybody's favorite character. We all love Slippy Toad, don't we?
Oh, so much.
I demand Slippy and Smash.
Yes.
So there was a staff member at Nintendo who always used a toad as a personal mascot, and Miyamoto just kind of liked that concept. Now, what's even more fascinating, as far as I'm concerned, are the bad guys. Here in the United States, we say that we fight like cats and dogs, right? Common saying,
Yes.
Sure.
cats and dogs. I'm not crazy. I
I've
know
heard
A
I'm
of
not,
little bit.
I'm crazy. So there is a similar expression in Japanese where people fight like dogs and monkeys because monkeys are common in Japan and they fight with the dogs. So our saying is fighting like cats and dogs. Their expression is fighting like dogs and monkeys. And so this is where basically the armies come from. The Cornerian army became dogs with General Pepper, a dog at the helm, and the enemy army was monkeys led by Andros, who is a monkey. Which I had no clue. I love that concept.
I had no idea.
It makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Makes perfect sense. And if it wasn't clear, the X Wings are from the R Wings rather are the X Wings from Star Wars. That's a pretty direct inspiration there.
That
That,
yeah, that influence is
I
pretty
know.
clear.
I know.
I don't see it. What are you guys talking about?
Oh, really? We
They're
should
completely
maybe
unique.
we should maybe sit you in front of some Star Wars games then.
Nah.
Nah. So during development, Argonauts ended up sending 2 or 3 programmers to Japan. One of them was Dylan Cuthbert, the designer of X, and they were put up in a remote room in the Nintendo offices because Nintendo didn't want foreigners having access to all their secrets because that was really something they hadn't done before. These 3 guys that were invited from the team at Argonauts were really some of the earliest like second party, third party people that were ever invited to Nintendo. They kind of predate even Rare. We talked in the past about Rare and Donkey Kong Country
Oh yeah.
being in there, but this kind of predates that. So the first real group of outsiders, I'm not sure if they were the absolute first, but they're one of the earliest. Put in a remote room, and there's this really funny story that they had that Miyamoto would literally like he would frequently come into the room to give them advice or solicit feedback, and he was a notorious chain smoker at the time. So they just remember him coming in and like giving them advice and like puff 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 just smoking left and right in front of them. So that was the story that they all had that stuck out to all the guys. Yeah, they made Star Fox. The game was revealed to the world at CES 1993 and it ended up releasing in Japan on February 21st, 93, a month later. And it hit the US a month after that on March 26th, and then Europe, I think June 5th or 6th. So it came out pretty quickly, which is weird for a game in this era too. There usually was a lot more time between them, but you had like 1 month, 1 month, 1 month. I guess it makes sense though, since this was a Western developer, they kind of got to make both versions at one time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I can see that.
We've all become used to games getting kind of simultaneous global releases, with just a few notable exceptions. That yeah, back in the day, you wait 6, 9, 12 months to get a game out of Japan.
I know. I think about that every time I write one of these episodes and I have the alternating dates like that. How lucky we are to get a universal release nowadays for video games. Uh,
Absolutely, yeah. We're so accustomed to it, we take it for granted, right?
all right, so Star Fox. Star Fox, Star Fox, Star Fox. For those of you who don't know, it's a rail shooter in the third person and first person 3D perspective. You basically just navigate your aircraft, your spacecraft called an R-wing through environments, attacking enemies and picking up power-ups along the way. And yeah, that's I mean that's it in its most simple way. There's more to it, but I guess with that, let's talk about Star Fox. So I guess before I go into that, Ryan, did you ever get a chance to play Star Fox 2?
I have not.
Okay.
That's one of my blind spots I plan to get to. Did I see that did get released like
it
sometime in the last few years?
it did. So let's talk about Star Fox 2, and it segues into Star Fox 64. We'll put this all together, and then we'll talk about our own experience with Star Fox. So immediately after they released Star Fox, they started working on Star Fox 2. It takes a lot of the same inspiration. They improved on some things they want to do, but it's largely the same game, right? The team at Argonaut did it, and Nintendo did it, and basically what had happened was, my favorite stories always start with that, right?
Indeed, they do.
By the time they got it about 95, 98% complete, Argonauts took it to Nintendo and said, hey, we're done with this. Do you want to release it? Nintendo basically was in this time period where they were working on the Nintendo 64, and they said, you know what we really want is there to be a very clear distinction between the Nintendo 64 era and the Super Nintendo era. And they felt that all the work and the presentation of Star Fox 2 would have muddied the waters between the two. So despite the fact that the game was, I mean, it was done. It's not an exaggeration. It was done. All they had to do was playtesting and localization. That's all they had to do left in the game. Nintendo said, "Nah, we're going to cancel this, and we're going to look forward to the Nintendo 64." And so the game, they actually did finish it. They did the play testing, they did the localization, and then they shelved it. It never saw the light of day until the Super Nintendo Classic Console came out. The little re-releases they were doing that had all the built-in games. That's where they re-released Star Fox 2. It's on the Classic Console. Now,
Well, wouldn't that not be a re-release? That would be a release.
it's a release. You're correct. You are
Mm.
very correct. So what Nintendo did do though is they looked ahead to the Nintendo 64, and they started work on Star Fox 64. And Star Fox 64 is basically um, about 10% of the original game, 60% of Star Fox 2, and then the rest of 30% is content that they basically made for Star Fox 64 itself. So Star Fox 64 is very much the same game as Star Fox and Star Fox 2, because they all basically were piggybacked off one another. Because Star Fox 2 was developed mostly off of Star Fox. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, it does. Yeah.
So, in a lot of ways, we've all played the same game, is kind of the point. They have the same storyline, they have the same gameplay. The one you guys have done looks very different than the one I've done, but honestly, the line between Star Fox, Star Fox 2, and Star Fox 64, I mean, it really doesn't exist because they're largely, I mean, they might as well be the same game. Not that that's weird for a video game franchise that just, piggyback off something and call it a new number. I mean, that was pretty common back then, but it's, I think it's funny because this is a very popular series, and this is why I asked the question about the Smash Brother characters. This is a really popular series, super popular series, and it there's what, 6 games in the main series, isn't that it? I think there's only 6 of them, and
Yeah, in the Smash series,
no, in Star Fox, 1, 2, 64. There's Command. There's
Zero.
Zero. 3D is a remake of Star Fox here. I don't know if you want to count that as its own. It wasn't. It's just called Star Fox 64 3D for the 3DS.
There's also Star Fox Assault.
That's, yeah. I mean, so there's just not.
What about Star Fox Adventures? Are we not counting that?
That's the other one. That's the one I
Uh,
couldn't think of.
that's more
Yeah.
of a Dinosaur Planet game.
Well, I mean, it's still a Star Fox game in
Yeah,
reality, even if it's just a skinned dinosaur game with Star Fox in it for some reason, you know.
All right, so Star Fox, Star Fox, Star Fox. Ryan, what do you remember? You said you played the ever living crap out of this game.
What do I remember?
Yeah, what do you remember?
3 words. Okay, make that 4 words.
4 words. I knew it.
Do a barrel roll.
Oh my god. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, good old Slippy.
Okay, so I remember the marketing hype behind that game as it was coming out, because that was coming out with a well psyched up accessory, I believe.
So the budget for Star Fox, was about, the marketing budget was about $15 million, which, I mean, in 1993 money was
Mm-hmm.
a lot of money. I mean, it's a lot of money now, but perspective. So you're right. I mean, it was absolutely everywhere, and the Super FX chip was like the wave of the future. Rob, what do you said you were a fan? Are you a fan of this game? What do you like about?
Well, obviously, I've never played the original.
Right.
I didn't play 2 either. I started, and most of my time was played in Star Fox 64, and
Right.
it's easily one of my most played 64 games. I can't tell you how to do every secret mission at this point. I remember a few of them, um, but I know that I spent many, many times trying to find the alternate paths to get to the secret levels,
Mm-hmm.
and just playing the hell out of this game. I enjoyed it, and it's kind of funny looking and seeing, because my thing is with these games that I don't play, I normally go and watch speed runs or just playthroughs of them, and it's insane how much the original was built in on 464. I mean, I told you as I was watching them, it's the same damn game.
I mean, it pretty much is the same game.
Oh no, absolutely, I agree 100% with you. After watching that, it's the same. It's just 64 was a little fancier and had some extra levels.
Mhm. Did did we beat it? Let me ask you that. I don't know. I can never remember playing through the entire thing, to be honest with you.
Many, many times, yes.
Yeah, Ryan,
Both
how about you?
the normal and alternate endings.
There's alternate endings.
I mean, an alternate boss fight at the end, yeah.
In
Hmm.
terms of Star Fox 64, I beat that hundreds of times, and just the way those missions are designed, right? It encourages you to replay it and try different routes through the planets on 64. Yeah, certainly, remember flipping through, getting that monthly Nintendo Power magazine or whatever the subscription of the day was, and hoping there's some more hints in that month's issue. And yeah, played it. I probably beat it, dozens of times for sure.
I don't know if I ever beat the original, but I definitely remember like Nintendo Power and other fit guides, telling about the alternate path, because that, I mean, the original one is pre-internet, so we didn't have any other way to learn. It was really like word of mouth, and those magazines were how we learned that there were alternate paths. I think I remember a friend who had like a drawing on a piece of paper where they tried to map out map it out. Now you can just go get a picture of it online, like snap your finger. But back then we had to resort to pen and paper, pencil and paper, not even pen. Not even pen. No one even used pen back then. We chiseled it into stone.
I spent hours trying to unlock James McLeod as a playable character. Turns out
Wait.
that's just a rumor.
Okay. I was about to say, like, hold on, don't blow my mind anymore.
No. It's like, oh, this is just a huge waste of my time. Thanks.
Oh my god. But I mean, what do you let's start with you, Ryan. What do you like about what's appealing to you about Star Fox?
A couple things. The challenge, it threads the needle between, it being too, it's not too difficult. It's got the different paths where you can kind of self-select into more difficult levels, and so it's kind of works with you to figure out what works best for individual people. Replayability was great, and um, at the time the graphics, right?
Yeah, for real. Yeah, those I mean, even on 64, that was when Polygon was just becoming a thing, and it fit the theme of the 64 so well. Um, yeah.
Unfortunately, the people who came up with the acronym for the Mario chip
Mm-hmm.
did eventually get fired. So that's why all of the early Nintendo 64 games are Pilot Wings 64, Star Fox 64, Super Mario 64. Do you
That's
see a
why
pattern?
It
they,
was
they
a marketing venture. They really wanted you to have to say 64. So when you're talking about a game, you want to get the console.
Yeah, but that acronym team was like, just feet up on the table. What kind of game you got coming out? Oh, well, that's Pilot Wings
64.
64.
No, I know there was everything. Rob, why Star Fox for you? You're a fan. What do you like?
Honestly, a lot of the same things Ryan said. I mean, it's the replayability was there because you had the different routes in game, and depending on what kind of mood you're in when you wanted to play it, you could decide, hey, do I want to take the easy route and just hit all the easy levels? Do I want to find the secret levels and go through the lava and find the spaceship with the pyramid and um, just continuing to find all these different secrets, and obviously the more secret levels were a lot more difficult, so it was how many, like, can I continuously get to this and beat it and win the game. So it was just one of those games that I first started out liking to challenge myself with, because you could play it simply and just get through it, or you could force yourself to have a real good challenge with it. And I enjoyed it a lot, and I thought it played well, and I mean, I even enjoyed the graphics. I mean, I never thought, I started playing it young enough that it was still pretty good graphics for the time. Because I started playing this with a friend before I got my own 64, and it's just one of those games that growing up we played the hell out of, and ever since I've loved the Star Fox series.
Well said. Well, the Super FX chip was used in other games, as Ryan already alluded to. Ryan, do you actually know how many other games they use the FX chip in? You take a
Uh,
guess.
I mean, I can't take a guess because I happened to look at it, but prior to that, I would have guessed, like 6 to 12, something like that,
But you know the number is lucky number 7 now.
maybe.
I'm gonna guess that it's 7.
It's 7.
Yeah, look at me go! Woo! Edit that so I said it first.
Wait, it's 7?
It's 7? So those games were Dirt Racer, Dirt Track FX, Stunt Race FX Wild Tracks, Vortex, Doom, Winter Gold, and Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island. Now, we own two of those, which were Stunt Race FX and Super Mario World 2. So let's go back to Stunt Race FX. Ryan, you obviously were a fan.
Yeah, it's funny because my memories are very fuzzy about that, but I must have rented that, so, but, for your younger listeners, back in the day, we had to go to a physical store to rent a physical copy of a game.
Don't forget, you could also rent the console if you didn't have one.
Yes, that's right. And unfortunately, sometimes, there wasn't a Super Mario World 2 to rent, and you're just like, well, what's this game? It looks a little goofy. Stunt Race FX. I'll give it a try. And it's like, okay, this is pretty legit.
It was very goofy. It
Yeah.
was very goofy. I think you could like. I know it was like dirt tracks and stuff like that, but I vaguely remember you being able to like extend the legs of your car to drive over things. Uh, yeah, I
Will we be talking about Stunt Race next week?
no, no,
Oh, okay.
no, no. I doubt I could pull up enough on Stunt Race. But Super Mario World 2, we had Super Mario World 2. Super Mario World 2 is
Mm,
I,
legit. Yeah.
legit. The FX chip was, I mean, it's not a 3D game. It's a 3D game, but in the case of it's not a polygon 3D game like the rest of these FX games. In the case of Super Mario World 2, that FX chip was used to accelerate its 2D graphics. They could do rotation and scaling and all sorts of fascinating things with the chip that made Super Mario World 2 I mean, that was a pretty badass game. I loved it. I'm not in love with it the way I mean, we've done an episode on it. So Super Mario World 1 is one of my absolute favorite games in hindsight. I wasn't in love with 2 the same way I was in 1, but that didn't make it not a good game. So,
Yeah. Mario World 2 was legit. Like, if you maybe tone down or change the sound file for crying baby Mario,
yeah, yeah,
it
exactly.
becomes top 10 all
Yeah,
time. But oh man,
yeah, for sure.
that crying
I know.
now
I
gives me flashbacks.
I know. Well, that's exactly what ruined it for me. The whole concept of Yoshi's Island. So Baby Mario. Ugh. But I do remember, like in hindsight, knowing what the FX chip does and the rotations and scaling. Like I get it now because it did a lot of cool things with the enemies and stuff. So well, the team at Argonaut, with the seeds that they started planting here at the Super FX chip, that led them to create something even bigger. They were doing some really interesting game development with what they did with the Super FX chip. Eventually, they got into like 3D modeling and stuff like that. But at some point, they decided that there was more value in letting other people use their technology as opposed to them only using it for Argonaut projects. So they spun off what they learned in chip making and their little chip making endeavor into its own company. Now, nowadays the company's called Arc International, and they Arc designs microcontrollers that are used in. Let me put it to you this way: in 2020, they shipped 1.5 billion products with Arc processors in them. They include things like digital storage, so they might be the little microprocessor that powers up your flash drive or your hard drive. They could be digital home, so things like your Alexa or your light, your digital light bulbs. Mobile automotive, they may be powering up your little display on your dashboard, and many other devices in what we call the Internet of Things. So if you have a device that connects to the internet, it could have a little microprocessor that's made with an ARC processor. And the ARC processors are basically the Super FX is where they started, and they turned it into this. That's a huge company now. Actually, ARC International doesn't exist. They were bought out by another company, but just this novel concept that they went from the Super FX chip to these little microprocessors that are in like everything. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the FX chip was just the small stepping stone they needed to get to creating the world of tomorrow.
Well, I mean, an ARC. So ARC isn't as popular. There's two major types of microprocessors, right? There's ARMs and ARCs, and ARMs are definitely the major one nowadays. You know, I think if ARC does 1.5 billion, ARMs are in like 200 billion type products or something like that.
I mean, still try to scoff at
I
$1.5 billion.
I know that's exactly right. That's exactly right. It's still a pretty big deal. And it's cool that the Super FX chip is where it all started. Um, So they split off their chip technology into Arc, and they kept their game technology. So Argonaut grew, and like many other companies that grow, it split itself off as we have with Arc, and also snatched up smaller companies. One of the companies they bought was a company called Just Add Monsters. They bought them out in September of 2000. That team began working on a game called Kung Fu Story, and they began to shop it around. But as they got further into development, Argonaut started to run into some financial trouble, and they couldn't find any publishers that wanted to assume the financial risk of taking out a game for a failing company. So, like so many other companies that we talk about that are in this exact situation, they ended up having to reestablish themselves as another company, and they sold themselves as that company to Sony to finish this project. Now, that ended up working out for them. The company that they formed is actually called Ninja Theory, and that project became Heavenly Sword. Now, Rob, we've covered Ninja Theory before. They made your absolute favorite Devil May Cry game. DMC Devil May Cry. I know how much that's your favorite in the series.
Oh yes, that is why that name struck such a resounding pleasant chord with my name, with my ears. Just I heard it and it was just, why does that sound so familiar and why does it bring this feeling to me? And yes, that
Uh,
is why.
yeah, because you love DMC Devil May Cry. It's the best Devil May Cry out of the whole series. It's
Sure,
one.
Dave.
The,
And you're always right.
well, yeah, I am always right. We played it. We played it in an earlier episode. They also created a really excellent game called Enslaved and Odyssey to the West, which I know, Rob, you haven't played. Ryan, do you have any familiarity with Enslaved?
Not directly, no.
No, it's an excellent game. Highly recommended if you ever get a chance. Ever get a chance.
Tell me about it.
I don't know how to tell you about it, to be honest with you. It's a action platformer with a really great story. That's the best way to put it. Um, it's kind of like an Uncharted, but with fantasy characters, and a
Oh.
really great story actually. So it's a phenomenal game. Highly recommended. Um, Eventually, Ninja Theory was able to break away from Sony. They started making games in what they called AAA indie titles. That's what they called them. The most well known of recent is Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. I'm pretty sure that won Game of the year it came out, didn't it? Isn't that the thing that year? Anyone play that? Either of you?
Nope. Never heard of it, actually, surprisingly.
Really?
Yeah, no.
Ryan, have you at least heard of Hellblade?
I've certainly heard of it. I'm a pretty big Game Pass guy, and so I'm familiar with it through
Game
that
Pass. It's on
that
Game
lens of it.
Pass.
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
that leads me to my next part. So, a couple of years ago, they were actually bought out by Microsoft, who felt that their games were a good fit for Game Pass. So now they're part of the Xbox Game Studios. Um, Ninja Theory is they're making Hellblade 2 right now. That's what they're working on. The first one was super popular. Really also great game if you've never had a chance. Really well known for a amazingly accurate depiction of mental illness. Really creepy game too. It has really great sound design, so if you ever go play for it, um, play it with really good headphones because the main character has, I don't think this is a spoiler, schizophrenia and hears voices. So you hear voices, and it's
Ooh.
really fucking great, actually. It is
Nice.
great. I mean, like, that is an excellent game. So yeah, so Argonaut snatched up Just Add Monsters. They spun that off, reestablished themselves as Ninja Theory, and then now they're Ninja Theory with Game Pass Studios. Argonaut ended up folding completely in 2004. Many of its employees left. Two of them founded Rocksteady Studios and hired a ton of previous Argonaut employees. And in case you don't know Rocksteady Studios, they are best known for the Batman Arkham series. A lot of pedigree here,
Absolutely.
a lot of pedigree here. Jez San is actually still a non-executive director for Ninja Theory, In 2005, he founded an online poker company called PKR. It lasted until about 2017 when it folded. In 2008, he founded a mobile application developer named Origin 8 that doesn't exist anymore. And most recently, in 2017, he founded a company called Fun Fair Technologies. Maybe not found, or he's part of it, but basically, I went to their website. They're a company that makes games or experiments with technology using blockchain, which you all know. I mean, if Ryan, you may not know. I think that's a stupid ass concept. So
Oh, it's the latest craze.
I
And
know.
hey, I've got some NFTs that I'm here to hawk.
Okay. And lastly, Dylan Cuthbert, the guy who made the the guy who said X is going to give it to you. He eventually founded Q Games, which not only did Q Games work on the later Star Fox games, they actually did Star Fox Command and Star Fox 64 3D. But that company is best known for creating the Pixel Junk series of games. I've never played a Pixel Junk. Have either of you?
No, what is pixel junk?
It's a Sony
That's
specific.
on the PlayStation's
Yeah,
consoles, right? Yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
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 that
yeah.
that would explain it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a Sony specific series. Pixel Junk, they're just cute little characters, and I don't have. I can't say I've never played a Pixel Junk game, but I haven't played one enough for it to have stuck with me in any way, shape, or form. So yeah, that's pretty much Star Fox. Inspired by a shrine and Japanese folklore characters, and and years in the making, as early as the NES era, years in the making, really, which is really fascinating. So,
Earlier when you said the name Dylan is it yeah, Cuthbert, that name just like it struck a chord, and it's like, well, I don't remember why I know that name, but now after talking through it, yeah. um
later Star Fox games.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, honestly, same. That when you first said Cuthbert, I was like, I know I've read that. Why is that so familiar to me? I was kind of shocked.
he's also like, if you're trying to look up the history of Star Fox, he's the most vocal guy. He was one of the three guys that was sent to the Nintendo Studios and had to make this game in that isolated room, and he made that Game Boy demo that basically sold Argonaut Games to Nintendo. And I mean, really, his hand is in this entire thing, and pretty much every news story, including the ones that we're going to be posting in our show notes. All the news stories are interviews of him, and a lot of them mostly when the later games came out. They're like, "Oh, tell us about how you got involved with Star Fox," and he's like, "Well, I was there in the beginning. Here's some fun stuff you never knew. Like Miyamoto was a chain smoker, you know." So
Yeah, yeah, fun little facts about him like that.
you know or we had to work in an isolated room for like 4 months. And actually, just a side note, not really a side note but related to that, so Q Games is in Japan. Those three guys were there for so long they never ended up leaving.
They never let him out of that room.
They never let them out of that room. No, 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 they're still there making games to this day. So yeah, still there making games to this day.
Thank God for Grubhub.
Thank God for Grubhub. Well, there are some fascinating things about today's episode, like the Torii Gates and the Inari Shrine. So if you want to check them out, I'm going to post all my research and my show notes. And of course, you can find that on our website at www.memorycardlane.com. Rob, what else can people find on our website?
Well, you can find calendars that include all of our upcoming episodes, and you can look back at the previous episodes, like Dave said. You can see some pictures of Dave and I, some little blurbage about Dave and not me, and you can also find links to our social meteors. Dave, what planet are you on?
I'm on various platforms as David is wrong, or where, I mean, because it's the truth. I'm wrong. Don't trust a word I said. Rob, what about you?
I am on twitch.tv/FATBOIRIPZ.
And Ryan, you're just you. You just exist in the real world, right?
You'll
Just
never find me.
yeah, I know. I know. I know. It's sad, really, because I really enjoy spending time with you, but it's the truth.
No, absolutely. If you want to find me, bring up the local Merriam-Webster dictionary, flip it to nobody, and I'm right after that.
You know, you know what's funny is that one of my good friends, their screen name is Nobody. So I mean that doesn't necessarily work. You just sold him up the river.
Oops.
Oops.
Sorry, not
Oopsie.
sorry.
Well, no, he's after nobody.
Oh, after Nobody. Okay, don't look for Nobody. Look for after Nobody. All right, ladies and gentlemen, each week we tell you the story about one game relevant or console or technology. It's just one thing relevant to the current week in gaming history. While doing so, we hope to teach you something new about the world, something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world as its legacy. Apparently, I can't talk today. One of the best parts about doing this podcast week in and week out is that we learn things, because when you teach people things, you always learn things. Never forget that. When you teach, you learn. It's a cycle, and a glorious one at that, one that we're very, very thankful to be a part of. As part of our commitment to that cycle, we go round table. We like to talk about what we learned today. So, our greatest takeaways. So, Ryan, you're our guest today. What did you learn today? What is your biggest takeaway from today's episode?
I mean, honestly, Dylan Cuthbert's obsession with single letters. Game X, Q Games, not very creative in the naming department.
Definitely not the game guy who added 64 though. That's one character too many.
Yeah, that's over the top.
Yeah, he can't possibly be that guy. One too many. So fair enough. Dylan Cuthbert and one letter game. You know what's? I don't think there's anything else in his catalog that would lend credence to that, but it would be phenomenal if there
Not
was.
yet.
Not yet. Okay. Oh, when you search him on the wikis, all it comes with is Q Games. He's not. He doesn't even get his own entry. The entry for him is the entry for Q Games. So, any other one title games? Oh, they made Escape in 2010. Oh man, the
Like
rest
the
of
letter X followed by cape.
no Scape, like RuneScape.
Oh,
Escape.
I thought it was X cape.
Actually, it's known as X Returns to Japan, so I have no. I'm guessing it's probably a sequel to X. Oh, there you go. It's a sequel to the 1992 Japan only Game Boy title X.
Yeah,
So,
I would have thought it would be titled Y.
oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. What else does Q Games make? They've made Pixel Junk Shooter, Pixel Junk Shooter 2, Pixel Junk 4AM. I don't even want that. That sounds like a really nasty Snapchat. Pixel Junk Monsters, Pixel Junk Eden, Pixel Junk Raiders, and they've been making a game called The Tomorrow Children. I don't know what that is.
It's a game they're working on.
It's described as a mix of Minecraft-esque collaborative building, social economics, and a Soviet Union-themed post-apocalyptic dystopia.
Okay.
I have to check this out now. Okay. All right. Anyway. Okay, so Ryan, Dylan Cuthbert, that's what he learned. Rob, what did you learn today?
That the R-Wing was inspired by the X-Wing.
Oh my goodness. Fantastic. Bravo.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you didn't know, you didn't know. That's okay. There's nothing.
I mean, hey, I thought it was unique. I mean, now that I'm thinking about it, like it makes sense. Like the wings close up when they zoom, but like I don't know, I just never really put two and two together.
Hold
But
on.
other than that, I think it's the Torii Gates is a really cool.
If you see a picture of the Torii Gates, you'll get it. They're super cool. So
Now that you say that, like I've seen the Torii Gates, so I know like that's immediately boom, damn, like whoa, that's crazy. And obviously Kitsune's, foxes are awesome. So,
Yep.
it's just awesome to hear that, hey, the shrine of Kitsune.
I just realized the ships are R wings.
Yeah, but unfortunately they're spelled AR wing. So I'm guessing that Dylan didn't have any say in the naming convention. So
Well, no, they asked their pirate friend.
oh yeah,
They thought they said they needed a pilot, but
they went with the pirate instead. So R wing.
Oh.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. Let's see. I really was fascinated by where the characters came from. I didn't. I honestly, I'd never heard the expression about fighting like dogs and monkeys. And for whatever reason, that was the single most fascinating thing to me. The fact that he took that idiom and he turned it into literally like those are the two fighting armies. Uh, I just think that's really cool, personally. So, yeah, that's it. That's what I got. And that's Star Fox. We did it, boys. We did it.
Woo
Woo!
woo!
Yay! All right. Well, before I take it out of here and take it into next week, start with you, Ryan. Is there anything you want to add to today's episode? Any last words? What do you got for the audience?
Somebody once.
Oh my goodness. Oh man. Well, thank you for joining us.
It's been a pleasure, gents.
It's always a pleasure. It's definitely always a pleasure. So I appreciate you coming on. Appreciate you telling us about your Star Fox experience. I'm definitely wasn't as into this as you guys were. I'm one of those that definitely spent more time playing these characters in Smash Brothers than in Star Fox itself.
I own a VHS copy of the Star Fox 64 promotional VHS.
That's good.
I still
Wow.
have it. I don't know why. Please help.
No. Things like that are great. I don't remember when we talked about it, but I have a VHS called How to Win at Video Games, which is from the NES era, and it had games like How to Win, like How to Finish Metal Gear and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and I think there was another game that I can't recall right now.
Well,
So,
Dave, based on your abilities, it's clear to me you've never watched that even
yeah,
It's too
once.
no,
bad.
I
Yeah.
haven't finished either of those games, so
Missed
you're right.
opportunity for sure.
Yeah, you're so right. Ah, God, it was narrated by a funny guy, funny name guy too. Can't
Gilbert
remember.
Gottfried?
No. It was some
Ah,
video
no, it'd
game
be
champion with
incredible.
a funny name. I can't remember it now. Well,
Same thing
it's
with
on
Dave.
it's on YouTube. Just YouTube how to win at video games, NES, VHS, or something like that. So, Rob, what would you like to add to today's episode?
Well, Dave, as always, I do want to take a quick moment to say thank you to everyone for listening. It means the world to us. We're having a fun ride, and we hope that you're enjoying the ride along with us. And also, a big thank you to Ryan for joining us. It's awesome getting to hang out with you again, man.
Rock and roll.
Well, on that note, let's look forward to next week. So next week we're going to be learning about a genre of video games that really simply aren't for everyone. Originally a subgenre of educational games, typing games have evolved beyond their original purpose as typing tutors. As part of our story, we'll learn about the history of typing games, including the Mavis Beacon series, Typing of the Dead, The Texorcist, and more. So stick around and join us as we work on increasing our words per minute on yet another trip down memory card lane. Do the thing.
Scooby doo bop 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 doo bow.